Welcome back, everyone. Today's podcast, we're going to dive right in 3 huge mistakes that doctors are making when it comes to interpreting your labs. So with that being said, I'm not trying to put down any other doctor or any other healthcare practitioner, so it sounds kind of inflammatory for me to say that, but nonetheless, I'm talking about what happens when we typically get our blood drawn and then we get a couple of these lab markers back, and the approach that we're taking traditionally across the board is a big mistake. And so I'm going to tie into 3 of the most common ones that I see. There's probably more, quite frankly. Yeah, these are 3 most common ones, and pay attention, because if you're getting labs out there, most likely you've had all 3 of these tested. And oftentimes the direction you're sent is not one that serves you. So once again, folks, I appreciate that you're here. Welcome to another episode of the Health Made Simple Show. I'm your host, Dr. Bart. Let's dive right in. 3 huge mistakes that many doctors are making when it comes to interpreting their labs. Number 1 is that they are blaming your total cholesterol number for all of the cholesterol issues. So there's a big difference between having a total number and then understanding what's going on within the cholesterol panel. In a nutshell, folks, when we do our cholesterol evaluation, the goal is that we are trying to determine what is the risk factor of having certain cholesterols that are either too high or too low sometimes even. So that is the goal here. So if we're just looking at total cholesterol, unfortunately, that can lead us down a road that really doesn't make any sense. And more often than not, when I have people come into me, it always makes me cringe a little bit when they say, hey, I went and got my annual physical with my doctor, got my checkup, everything looks pretty good. Yeah, tells me my cholesterol is getting too high. And then I ask, which part of the panel? Then they say, I don't know. Well, I guess my total cholesterol number. They don't really know. They're just told that they have high cholesterols, but not really what's in it. So with that being said, folks, your total cholesterol, frankly, by itself is almost irrelevant. Most of us that are practicing kind of from the functional perspective, functional medicine, functional nutrition, call it what you will, most of us, for the most time, it's total cholesterol. We just want to make sure it's too low. We don't like to see guys getting up below like 170 or something like that, or women below 150. That's problematic. Yet for the most part, your total cholesterol is irrelevant relative to what's making up. So we want to make sure if you're getting your cholesterol checked in advance, ask your doctor, whether they're a functional medicine practitioner or whoever's running your labs, say, are you going to run a complete panel? And these are the things that you want to see. Of course, you want to see your HDLs, your triglycerides, your LDLs. Let's get your total. Why not? Then we also want to know your particle sizes. We want to specifically see the small particle sizes. And then absolutely, we would love to see something called your ApoB. That's like the gold standard to let us know what your cardiovascular risk or your cardiovascular situation is overall. If you have all of those markers, we can very specifically identify where to make the changes, where to make the improvements. So again, one of the biggest mistakes that doctors are making are blaming or overemphasizing your total cholesterol as an issue with your cholesterol. So nowadays, the good news is this is in every facet of every type of functional medicine and nutrition conversations online. You're seeing this nonstop with all the social media channels, which I think is absolutely wonderful. Make sure that you are an advocate for yourself and you are talking to your doctors about running a complete metabolic panel that includes all of those different markers. One more that I love throwing in there is something called insulin resistance. All right, with that being said, let's move on to number 2 here. Another place where I think doctors are making a huge mistake when it comes to interpreting the labs is with B12 levels. All right, so hear me closely here. Oftentimes what we see is what I call whack-a-mole healthcare. Something's low, let's make it high. If something's high, let's make it low. And that doesn't necessarily serve us in the capacity of being stronger, healthier human beings. When it comes to B12, more often than not, I will see practitioners wait until that number gets into the 200s, 300s, 400s, something I consider all those very low. I like to see those numbers somewhere minimum at 500, maybe at 600, 700, 800 or above. With that being said, typically when the practitioner sees those low, and listen, even some of you out there, my colleagues that are listening to this, you're using vitamins and supplements and herbs in your practices. Awesome, as do I. And maybe in functional nutrition or functional medicine, and you see low and you drive it high with a supplement. I'm going to tell you to pause for just a moment. And the reason being is we want to get to the root cause of why you have B12, low levels of B12. Anything under 500 to me, I consider low. And with that being said, there's really comes down to 2 fundamentals. It may turn out that we got to take care of these two things and supplement, but we have to address these first two things. And number one is, are you consuming foods that have B12 in it? And the list goes like this: red meat, number one, eggs, organ meats, etc. That's where we get the primary sources of B12. Those are the wonderful things. So if you're not eating red meat and you're not eating eggs, you just have a less likelihood that you're getting much B12. The second component of this is probably where most people fall short, and that is having adequate amounts of hydrochloric acid, HCl, in their gut, meaning a gut that's super acidic, not alkaline. So if anyone out there is on proton pump inhibitors and they're sustaining the usage of antacids, all those PPIs, all of those things, unfortunately, folks, that makes your gut more alkaline. And as a result of it, you cannot break down or bind B12. So across the board, many of the practitioners who are listening to this, you will see people that are utilizing PPIs and people that have their antacids that are consuming on any type of a regular basis. We'll see low levels of B12 across the board. So number one, and this is for a lot of my ladies out there just are flat out not eating enough red meat and or eggs and or organ meats. Those are the best sources. So one, we have to eat it. And the second is we have to be able to digest it. Earlier in my career, when I saw high B12, I gave people B12. So this is a process. This is a journey for all of us to continue to learn. Then when I stood back and I said, well, why are so many people deficient here? First was they just weren't eating it. We've been told that red meat is so bad for us. We've been told for years to stay away from it. Even every now and then, at best, is the only time we should eat it. Same things like even eggs. We've been told their cholesterols are too high. All inadequate, imperfect examples or imperfect descriptions of what those foods really do for us. They do have cholesterols, but they're really good for us. And they give us so many other vitamins and nutrients that by avoiding them, there's good likelihood that we're going to be deficient in them. So I think that's part of it. So number one, we want to make sure that our people, our clients, ourselves, we are eating and consuming the foods that have B12. Second, again, from a functional perspective, we want to make sure they have the tools to be able to break these nutrients down. So B12 needs a very, very low acid. And as we age, folks, the unfortunate part, and I don't know that it's an age thing as much as it is what happens over the course of age with the stressors and the pollutants and the toxins we're exposed to, that as we age, we are lowering our HCl levels, meaning that we have lower hydrochloric acid in our stomach, which means it becomes harder and harder for us to break down things like protein and different collagens. That's really done by pepsin. But either way, we need those things in order to be able to consume and digest these animal proteins and then utilize the nutrients that we break down. If we don't have an adequate amount of HCl, when we eat things like red meat, we're going to say things like, man, I just don't feel good when I eat red meat. It sits there like a brick. Or I've removed it because every time I eat it, it upsets my stomach. If that's you and you've said that before, understand that is a red flag. That tells us that your body, your digestive system no longer has the capacity to break these nutrients down, and it's giving you a little bit of a red flag. Doesn't mean lean away from it, lean into it. Let's get to the root cause. Let's make sure that we're providing ample amounts and we have the tools to break it down. When we see that, I always see the B12, not always, but 99% of the time, we will see the B12 level come up naturally with absolutely no supplementation. All right, last but not least here, very important one, goes hand in hand with the B12. It's low iron levels. Ladies, mostly I want you to pay attention to here because many of you listening to this are still in your cycling years. You inherently are losing a lot of your iron every time you have your period each month. That being said, we want to get it back. And it's going to go to the same thing. Unfortunately, I see too many docs out there see low iron levels, and the first thing they go to is whack-a-mole healthcare and say, okay, let's give more iron. But it doesn't necessarily make it metabolically available. In fact, a lot of you out there that have gone on medications, or not medications, but supplements for iron, you recognize you actually don't like it. It's something that it might make you constipated, it might make you tired, etc. So very rarely you're going to feel really good by just going on an iron supplement. So what do we do about this? First, let's pay attention to the foods that have iron in it and make sure we're consuming those. And guess where they are? That's right. Red meat, eggs, those organ meats, those are good. The primary sources that you're going to get good heme iron, the one that's bioavailable for humans to consume. Now, the second part of this is, are you able to break those foods down? And again, there's a tendency here, not across the board, but there's a tendency that I see a lot of my female patients eat a little bit less red meat. But I could argue maybe they actually need more, especially during your cycling years, because you need more of that iron. So the two components is before we start to pump an iron into the body, we want to make sure, are we consuming it? So this essentially is functional medicine, folks. This is getting to the root cause. Are you consuming the food? And can you break it down? Before we just start playing whack-a-mole, make low, high, high, low, we want to make sure that we are doing the bare minimums of making sure that we have the availability here. Now, when it comes to iron, like what are some of the symptoms of low iron? There's a lot of them. Fatigue is probably number one. That is across the board. Coldness in the extremities, like in your fingers or feet and stuff like that. Sometimes a little bit of numbness and tingling, but that fatigue is usually number one across the board. But before we just start plowing high levels of iron, because remember, technically, iron is a heavy metal, and usually we use that term for when all the toxic stuff. But if you put too much iron in the body, that's a whole different game of other toxicities that we can cause. So we want to make sure that before we start pumping iron into the body, and yes, as a practitioner, there are times when I short term will supplement iron along with making the dietary changes of making sure the body has the adequate amount of hydrochloric acid. I'll share that supplement in just a moment, and making sure that we're consuming it. Because if we're not consuming it, we're going to expect that it's going to be low anyways. So across the board right here for both B12 and the iron, if those are deficient, the supplement I start people with, and I've mentioned this so many times on my podcast, is a digestive enzyme. This may be the least sexy, most important supplement across the board for all of us. I say least sexy because it's not a protein, it's not amino acid, it's not something to make big muscles or make us burn fat. Yet it helps us break down our food. It protects us from things like parasites and bacteria and viruses, all the things that are coming into the body. By having a very strong acid in our stomach, it is part of our immune system that kills things off. And it helps the digestive part, the digestive system, right in what we call the upper GI, literally your stomach, not the intestines. It allows your stomach to start breaking these foods down before they move into the intestines where they're going to be absorbed. All right, folks. So again, the three top, what I think are really huge mistakes being made by doctors across the board when it comes to your labs. Number one, overemphasizing the what total cholesterol means. It is not enough to make the decision on your risk factors, meaning that literally it's not enough to make a decision about to come on or off of medication. And again, I'm not here to give you any medical advice to cure or anything like that. It is just to give you more information, educate you, to level you up a little bit, and understand that just looking at your total cholesterol is not adequate relative to understanding your risk factors. We want to see some other markers there. And then the two other ones, they almost go hand in hand, and most docs are testing for these, which I think is great. B12 levels, we don't want to just start pushing in, especially synthetic cyanocobalamin type B12 supplementation. We want to make sure there's still a whole food source if we're going to use it, but just looking at that level, if it's low, we don't want to just drive it high. We want to make sure we're consuming the foods and we have the adequate tools to break it down. And then same thing when it comes to iron. This one is often misdiagnosed to some degree, saying, oh, it's low, therefore we have to push it up higher. And often that can create other symptoms by just adding too much iron at one time. We want to consume the food and make sure that we have the access to break these foods down. All right, folks, with that being said, keep doing your thing. Keep sharing it out. Keep spreading the love. I appreciate what all of you are doing by hitting the like button and you're sharing this. All of those things give us more access to more people. And that's the whole goal here of the Health Made Simple podcast. Make sure that we continue to just remind ourselves that truthfully, being healthy is a simple process. We are designed by our creators to be healthy. Most of the time, it's our job to get out of the way. I didn't say that it's easy. I said that it's simple. So with that being said, make sure you're taking deliberate action for your mind, your body, overall wellness. Y'all be awesome.